Never made a dresser before, and I would go as far as saying I didn't know what I was doing when I started. But I'm pretty happy with the way that it turned out. We've been using this for a couple weeks now, and it's been great having a spot designated for changing a baby. And in combination with the baby board that I have, it's been great to be able to just reach for diapers and then go into the drawers for any clothing. If you want to follow and see how I did it, or even better yet, watch and comment any tips you have for me, that'd be great. All right, let's go.
So the whole desk was made out of maple. As you can see here, I'm just cutting some of these maple boards down to size. These were going to be used for the facing of the drawers. I decided to go with the box store wood that I got at Menards, simply because I just didn't want to spend the time running a bunch of wood through the planer and joiner. Wanted to try to get this project done quick because, well, we had a baby on the way. So here I'm just kind of taking these boards, setting them out, laying them down, looking at the grain. I wanted to make sure that the grain kind of flowed between all three drawers really well, and then making sure that to alternate the pattern the best that I could so that these drawers would be nice and flat. Once they were all glued up, I was able to just grab some of these clamps here, clamp them up nice and tight, and then moved it off to the side, let that dry while I started working on the other pieces. The rest of the project was just using maple plywood here. This is a 4x8 sheet, 3/4 inch, and as you can see, I'm just kind of ripping this in half. One piece will act as the top and bottom. I'll cut that directly in half, as you can see here. I decided to use my chop saw here just because I didn't have a really good cross cut sled to use. So I cut one side as in half, about as far as I could, and then I took this off and flipped it around so that I could finish off this cut. This gave me the top and bottom, both of them being 4 feet in length. And once that was done, then I could go and find the other 2x8 piece that was left after ripping, so I could cut that into thirds, as you can see. Each one of these thirds would then be used for the we'll call it dividers, 2 on each side and then 1 in the middle, making that cabinet space. Once those were cut, I took my dusty camera and we started ripping some of these boards down. These thin slices are the pieces that are going to go around the edging. I call it face trim. This is what covers up all of your plywood, so you don't see any of those layers of plywoods on your facing. I was able to create 4 different trim pieces there just on a single 1x6, which was perfect because it gave me 2 trim pieces that I would use for the top and the bottom. And then I could cut 2 in half, which would serve for my corners, which will connect, as you can see here. I decided to use these corner pieces here just so that you wouldn't ever see any edging of the plywood. And I also decided to use this doweling jig so that I could throw some dowels in there just to line everything up to make sure that everything glues up right where I want it. So I'm drilling a couple holes here. I drilled 2 of them, 1 on each end. I could have and probably should have put one right in the middle, but I really didn't want to measure everything out, and this way I was able to just line up the edge of the wood to the edge of the doweling jig and then just drill a hole. So you can see here I am using the inside one, the one closest towards me, to drill this hole. And that's key because right now you can see we have 2 holes right next to each other. If we use the same one on both sides, we'd end up drilling into each other and probably just would not fit very well at all. And those dowels would hit each other. So just make sure if you are going to use a doweling jig for something like this, to just alternate those holes so that you don't drill into each other. Once those were done, I was able to grab that first divider and side there, and just remember again, drilling those doweling holes on the same one. Not as big of a deal on these dividers, because if you happen to do the wrong one, you can just drill a hole right next to it. Now, I've been just dry fitting all of this, and as I started working on that middle divider, I realized my phone died, and I didn't have the footage of me basically drilling these pocket holes. But that's all it was. Pretty simple. I just used this jig here to drill 4 pocket holes, and I wanted to make sure I've got these all on the inside. This is where the drawers are going to be, and I didn't want any of those holes to be shown from the cabinet side. So just making sure that we drill them on the right side. I will spare you from watching more drilling. I was able to get the other side up there and then was able to do basically the exact same steps from the bottom as the top. So you can see it has those edgings on there, drilled all the holes. So now just kind of fitting it on there, making sure that everything lines up. And this is going to be key to make sure once this is fit on there that everything is square. Once everything checks out, then we can move on to actually gluing this thing up. So Right now, I'm just kind of getting everything set up. I have two pipe clamps that everything is sitting on, and of course, those are the only two clamps that I have that are long enough. So I left my center divider in place, and I kind of used that to very lightly clamp this first one on there, and then I could take another one to clamp it the other way, and that just kind of sucks in those edges a little bit. And then once they're both there, I can take both of them to tighten it up a little bit. But you want to be careful and only do one at a time and be gentle with it so that you don't rip any of those pocket screws out. So I still have the two pipe clamps on there, but what I did for the edges was I took two clamps and basically just hooked them together so I could kind of do the same thing on the edges. It's kind of tedious, but it worked. So now I'm just kind of gluing up these sides, trying to get these dividers on. And this is going to be a really big glue up because you need to put both of those dividers on, then you need to put the top on, and you need to clamp both sides. So I actually had to go out and run and grab some more clamps because, of course, I didn't have enough clamps to be able to get 4 of them on both sides. Once I was able to get all the clamps on, I did move to the middle section here. I took a clamp and I was able to kind of clamp that edge to each other, just kind of holding it in place, making sure that everything was aligned. And then, of course, always making sure that everything is square, make any adjustments you need. But with that being square, I was kind of able to move over and then take some of these screws and drill in all of these pocket screws, which will help with that clamping force and glue up on these corners. At this point, we can move on to starting to build the drawers. Now, these drawers I made just out of some pine that I had laying around. These are 1x6s. Here I'm just sliding them through one time to get that first slot. This is where the drawer bottoms are going to go through. I do want it to be a 1/4 inch wide, so after running through all of them again, I would move the fence and just make another pass through to make that 1/4. Once that's all done, then we can move on to just kind of trimming up that bottom panel. So again, just using 1/4 inch plywood that I had laying around here and just kind of squaring it up to get the right dimension so that it can slide into my drawers. My drawers were approximately 30 inches wide by well, it was 1x6. So I guess it'd be 6 inches tall, 5 1/4, whatever. Seeing as this was my second time ever building a drawer, I did want to kind of lay everything out, make sure that I was doing this all right, making sure that the slots that I made were going to line up, making sure that everything kind of fit in there, and just kind of getting the overall idea of what this was going to look like as a drawer. So, laid everything out, I thought it looked pretty good, and moved on to trying to figure out how to secure these. I decided to use pocket holes again since I was able to have the kind of the front and the back the one facing the camera here. Those are not going to be seen, right? So that's going to be on the back side, so all the pocket holes will be in the back, never be seen. And then on the front side, you'll have the drawer face covering up the pocket holes on the front. So here I'm just kind of going through, I did 4 pocket holes per side. So this tool has 3 holes and I just kind of did the 2 outside holes, one on the outside, one on the inside, and then slid the board over and did the same exact thing, trying to make them all even, best that I could within that board. Just remember that on one of these sides you do have that slot running through, so you want to make sure that you are not drilling through there. I tried to make sure that I was on the inside of that at all times, since that's just going to be kind of on the bottom. I didn't want to secure down at that layer. So with that, these are looking good, and you can kind of see that's going to line up like that if you put it the right way. And then you can move on, you can do the exact same thing for the front. And then I decided to use a clamp here to kind of hold this in place. I know that they have, the Craig jig tools that you can put inside of the pocket hole to clamp it, but this worked just as good without having to buy that tool. So really nice tight clamping force there so that I could put one in at the top, and then you can kind of make sure everything's aligned, put one in at the bottom, and start filling in all the rest. And then using the same clamp, same place, you can do that on the other side as well. I will add that I did not use glue with this at all. I know I have it sitting there, but I just used the 4 screws. I mean, you have 8 screws holding on that board, so that should be plenty of strength without needing to add glue. So here, now that I got that one side complete, and a key piece is making sure you get that bottom in before installing the front or the back, whichever side. If you were to screw in that other one, you'll never get that bottom in. So sliding in that bottom, making that sure that has a nice tight fit. If you find that it doesn't, or as you're pulling it into the back or front, whichever, and it's just not going into that slot very well, I ended up taking my palm sander and just kind of sanding that down to kind of put an edge onto the bottom so that it could help slide in there, which worked really nice. And then just putting the back on, putting all the screws in there again, 4 on each side using that Craig jig. Um, yeah. So I needed to do that 3 times, right? So I had to do 3 drawers for my desk. And then once all of those drawers are done, I moved over to actually installing these sliders. So these slides are 20 inches long. However, my drawer is 22 inches long. So I wanted to give a little bit of space in the front just to make sure that everything cleared with the drawer face. And then it would also give me some space in the back. So when I pulled the drawer out, the very back of the drawer doesn't come all the way out. It's kind of recessed in, about 2 inches. But I was okay with that, seeing as you'd still be able to reach everything. You didn't have to reach into the drawer. So here I'm just kind of installing that. I like putting that box right on the table of my table saw just to keep that nice flat level, and then I can put the slide right there. So no measurements there on across the board. And then putting in here, I kind of did the exact same thing. However, here I did want to put a little gap, right? You don't want that drawer to be sliding on there. So I took a piece of this plywood, scrap plywood, and used that as the gapping material. And then again, because I was able to just kind of put that right at the base, which you can see in the background, it's right at the bottom. You can do the same thing here, and there is no measuring for at least that first drawer. So the first one done, we can take that and slide it in. These are sometimes rough getting in that first little bit. You really do have to push them with some force, but I would probably suggest, since I had broken one of them as I was doing it throughout this time, is to gently push them in and not ram them in like that. So nice, gentle, consistent force seems to do better. And then just make sure you push them all the way and pull them all the way out, and then make sure that they get seated properly. So for every drawer after that first one, I did want to make sure they were kind of nice and evenly spaced. And I knew that I had a 30-inch tall dresser to fill. So each drawer I wanted to be pretty even, which was right around 10 inches. I think it was maybe a 16th under, giving myself gaps there. So what I did was I just kind of measured from the bottom of the drawer to the bottom of the next drawer, making sure that I had a 10-inch gap there. And I just used that clamp, as you saw before, to hold a piece of wood there so that I could put my drawer slides down. And doing that again for the top one, same concept. We had all of the drawers nice evenly spaced inside of our dresser. And with that, we are moving on to all of our face framing. So these were those 3/4 inch strips that I kind of trimmed up to be the same size as the plywood. And so now I'm just kind of making marks here to make sure I have the correct length and getting the angle. So cutting these, mitering them at a 45 degree so that they can go all the way around and look nice. Now this, I gotta say, took me a while to try to figure out the exact length, and I gave up on measuring and decided to just lay it down and put a mark down there and go back to the table saw probably 7 times, as you can see here, to just trim off just a hair to get that perfectly lined up. I found that just doing the measurements myself, I was always off. So put a line, creep up to it until it is perfect, and then you can go ahead and glue these down and clamp each one. Now I started on the bottom of the drawer first to make sure that if I did make any mistakes, it would be at the lowest point, far away from your eyesight as possible. And then I kind of worked my way around at that point as I felt more confident to do the side and then the top where it will be most visible, and you want that looking the best. So starting at the bottom, kind of working your way around with these clamps. And of course I didn't have enough clamps, so I could only do one side at a time. So took a long time to get this all done, but thought it worked out pretty well. So enjoy my clamping montage here. I'll point out that I did not sand anything at this point. You can kind of see some burn marks from the table saw there. That is something that I do at the very end, right? I'll need to sand those down. Although hindsight probably would have been a good idea. When you're sanding that plywood, right, you always have that possibility that you sand too much and then you go through the veneer of your plywood. So Moving on here, what I'm doing is taking that tabletop that we glued up in the beginning and cutting them down to that 10-inch mark. These are going to consist of the 3 faces, and I like gluing that all up into one big chunk like I did so that you can kind of grain match everything. So it has a nice flow from your drawer to drawer to drawer, from your top, middle, bottom. And then just kind of going through and planing it up, making sure all of the edges are straight, and bringing it over to the drawer here to kind of do my spacing. Um, and of course, you're not making a YouTube video unless you use playing deck cards to do your spacing. So I counted out 8 cards. It kind of gave me the best spacing that I liked. It was about a 16th, maybe a little bit more, between 16th and an eighth of an inch gap all around. So I did 2 sets on the bottom just to kind of keep those up off the table bottom. And then I used this one deck to slide around to make sure that gap was there. And honestly, I don't know what I was thinking here. I used the same one on both sides, so I got the gap to where I want it. Then I moved over to the other side and tried to hold it and hope that it didn't move versus just putting 8 cards on the left side and 8 cards on the right side and calling it good. So I would have changed that, but moving on, I did get that first one, the bottom one, secured and didn't shoot it, but I am showing here. I am pre-drilling the 4 holes that I'm going to use to secure the facing on. And I know a really easy step would have been to drill the holes for the hardware so that I could use that to secure it. However, I didn't know if I was going to use the hardware or if I was going to later just cut out a dip in the wood and use like a natural hand. So I wanted to get these secured before doing that to see how it looked. So I was pre-drilling 4 holes here so that I could put a screw through it. And then I was trying to use a combination of double-sided tape and some clamps to like hold that in place. And I really just ended up forcing it with my hand, holding it there and drilling 1 screw into it. Since it was pre-drilled holes, it wasn't that hard to kind of just hold that and use my hand as kind of the clamp and not have it move around. But not ideal, and that kind of is something that I just kind of took away from that. So here again, I am just kind of taking those cards and trying to keep these in line as much as possible. So trying to keep that same gap there. And one thing that I did notice as I was doing all of this, and even when I finished all of the drawers, was that gap with a light colored wood is very noticeable. And I was picking on myself about not having it perfectly lined up. It probably had something to do with me just holding the wood while I was screwing it in. However, once it was stained and the wood was darker, looking at a darker wood with, a dark gap there, not nearly as noticeable as it is with a lighter wood. So with that all said, that kind of completes this build. Only thing left here to do is do a bunch of sanding, which I'm not going to show you me sanding, and doing the finish. For the finish, I did use a American walnut stain, so not as dark as like a black walnut, but still a nice color. And I did a pre-stain just to condition all of the maple to make sure that we didn't get any blotching or anything. I think it did turn out really well. I did 2 stains of the actual stain, one coat of the pre-stain, let that dry, and then did a coat of stain after that, within 10 minutes maybe. And then let that stain completely dry. Next day went out there and did a whole nother stain, which I thought made it look really good. Once that stain was done, the 2 coats done, then I took a spray can of the polyurethane and I used that for the finish to give it that nice gloss. It was a semi-gloss, which I think turned out really good. And I only did 1 coat really of that entire polyurethane. After that coat was done, I did take a 1200 grit sandpaper and sanded everything down by hand to just give it that really nice feel. So thanks for watching. If you guys have any comments or tips for me, I'd love to learn, so let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.